Hi, everybody. David Nour back with another episode of our Intelligent Growth with my business partner, Jenn Cordz. Hello, Jenn.
Hi, David. Great to be here.
It's good to have you. For our audience, we're excited to continue the series. And in this session, we're going to talk about something that we're constantly polling our relationships, our customers, our audience, our podcast listeners. And if you look at a topic that consistently ranks very high, is around data. And in essence, data, and there's been a lot written and talked about it, and but really data maturity. And how do you build a data-driven culture, a data-driven decision-making, problem-solving, communication culture? Now, Jenn's been in this world a lot longer I have in terms of creating dashboards and reports. And that what I have seen is really the enterprise value that comes from a data-driven culture. And one of the things we're going to talk a lot about, it is unequivocally driven from the top. If the CEO, if the senior leadership team, if the BU, P&L leaders, down to not just the executive ranks, but the managers, you've heard the old adage, inspect what you expect. And prioritize things that are important to you. If data and insights, more importantly, we'll talk about it, from that data isn't critical to your success, if you don't promote it, if you don't reinforce it, this idea of we're a data-driven culture is just never going to materialize. Jenn, your thoughts?
I would completely agree. And a lot of organizations come to want to be data-driven sort of after the fact, when they've had a lot of those pain points doing it all manually, or the team's grown, or maybe they have new board expectations and there's someone on the board asking questions that weren't being asked before. And at that point, if it's not pulled a part of your culture, it can be kind of a painful shift initially to get to a data-driven culture.
And I recently returned from SaaStra, and for our audience, if you may not know what that is, I certainly didn't. Jenn's attended several times, but I didn't realize this whole other world existed, which is it's the largest gathering of SaaS-based tech platforms. It was in the Bay Area, really insightful. And we're going to reference one of the presentations that really left an indelible imprint on just kind of my thinking. A gentleman named Dave Kellogg, and we're going to talk about this in a very bizarre world. He was the chief marketing officer at a company called Business Objects years ago, and I spent some time there. And he talked a lot about 15 signs that metrics are a problem in the company, and we want to reference. So this part of this is inspired by that presentation. We want to reference some of those signs, and Jenn and I will talk about it. And he was really insightful. And we thought that would also be really useful. It's also a good reminder, if you're not active in our Nour Forum community, nourgroup.com/forum, there is a RevOps group in there. We'll post questions, topics, discussions, reference points, reports and whatnot that we reference on these live or podcast sessions in there. So I encourage you to come join us. Again, nourgroup.com/forum, and look for the RevOps group. That's where we'll post a lot of these things. So Jenn, let me start with you. Data and data maturity, you and I have talked about. And we've got, by the way, another great partnership with a company called Versalytics, and Jeff Huckabee and that whole team talks a lot about this as well. It is absolutely a spectrum. Talk about the different, and classify for us kind of what are the X and Y axis of that spectrum?
Sure. So like you said, it is a spectrum. Most everybody starts with sort of patchwork analytics or departmental analytics, where everybody's taking care of their own thing. They come to meetings, and every business leader has their own version of reports. And so that's a very basic level of sophistication. So that would be the x-axis, and then the y-axis of the spectrum would then be the business value. Mm-hmm. When you're down in that first part of the little quadrant, down near the zero, if you will, the level of sophistication is not there. Everybody has their own reports. It's very manual. There's not a lot of collaboration with those sort of reporting structure. But then as you move to the right along the spectrum, you are getting deeper into those analytics by making them operational, making them into actually interactive dashboards, being able to go a couple levels deeper. Then you're getting into analytics that are related to predictive or proactive type metrics. Instead of lagging indicators, you're now having leading drivers that are being reported upon and that you can actually evaluate and dig into deeper to find those patterns. And then as you get all the way to the right, there's really that contextual, it's augmented, it's AI driven, and it's that predictive model version of the analytics. So that's kind of the spectrum that we think of.
And if I think about that X and Y, you're right. As you get closer to zero, it's at an individual level and not really collaborative. You're not, I appreciate it. And for our audience, Jenn's been pulling us kicking and screaming from like individual spreadsheets and individual documents. So like at least let's use Google Sheet or Google Doc or a way to really start collaborating around some of these things, and where different people give you input. And again, same thing with our systems, right? One of the painful lessons that I've learned last couple of years is you can have great systems if you don't use them on a daily basis and track that progress. You should have no expectations that we're going to have the data to really understand not just what's happening, but why. And more importantly, levers to do something about it. So what I really hope this will resonate with you is don't confuse output, which is important. That report is I don't want to take anything away from that report, but that report is an output with outcome, right? What do we do with that? What the insights that we extract out of that report is what's really useful to the organization with impact. Impact is about value creation. Impact is the results of the decisions we make, the results of the actions we take from the insights from that report. So in this formula, and as we talk about data maturity, you actually need all three. You need output. Without that report, I'm throwing darts in the wind. That output cannot be a end-all be-all. It needs to lead to some sort of an outcome. So I tend to think of output plus outcome plus impact. That's how you create value. And most, Jenn, I love your comments on this. Most clients we meet are not data poor. They're actually data rich, but they're insight poor. They're actionable insight poor. They're that outcome and impact is lacking kind of insights from the data that the output could create.
I would definitely agree. Most organizations have a plethora of data and they're tracking everything. One of the very large challenges that we've seen in several client organizations is they choose the metrics that they're going to use to report upon after they've already started the campaign, or when they're actually doing that retroactive, and they're just like, oh, well, we'll cherry pick these metrics because they look good or whatever. But they, at the onset of the campaign or whatever initiative it is, they haven't decided what that outcome is, and then the actual relevant metrics that would then show that the outcome was either achieved or not. And so it is just metrics for the sake of metrics, which doesn't get anybody anywhere.
And we've also tried to help automate. I'm reminded of for our audience, we have a very term of endearment for this: spreadsheet from hell, right?
Yes.
We've trying to automate that spreadsheet from hell for the monthly management meeting or the board meeting, quarterly board meetings, or when everything is captured manually, becomes such a lift because I'm now having to go find and update all of this versus really using the processes, using the systems to generate and automate those dashboards, those reports that are critical to your success.
And one other thought, just as people think about their data-driven culture, it's not, to your point, it's not just generating the report, but it's gaining those insights. And if you have a team that generates the reports or the dashboards, go back and ask the people who are actually doing that job. Maybe it's the content managers or the campaign managers. Ask them to give their insights on what are they seeing from these metrics, and recommendations for how to improve into the future. Because again, like if you just pull the report, that's great. That gives you one data point in the past, but then what is the insight? What is going to be changed going into the future to do better, and what levers can be pulled to actually improve some of those metrics?
I want to reiterate that people who are closest to the data utilization, the data acquisition. I love analysts, worked with some great analysts over the years, but getting close to people who are collecting that data for your firsthand view of where is it coming from, how are they doing this, and then people who put that data to use, in essence, the insights from that data becomes invaluable because you can see both ends of the value chain. Where is it coming from? How's it being used? And Jenn, you guys have walked in, you and your team have walked in, and when you do a baseline assessment, you see some bizarre data behaviors or lack of, like, forms on websites that go into Never Never Land and they're never captured. Or I think you and I were talking about, two disparate systems, HubSpot and Salesforce, or, outreach and sales, where the data is not syncing or it's just not going to benefit anybody.
Yeah, a lot of times just lack of architecture in their tech stack creates data silos. It creates miscommunications between systems, double tagging. A lot of times this data dirtiness comes up in attribution type conversations of where did that lead come from, and not tying their actions together. So for your example, the form fill, not actually getting tagged to a campaign, creating a cohort and moving through the system, tracking all of those people together, then it really doesn't help you when you're trying to go back and evaluate, did this work? Did this not? Did it generate the leads that we expected it to?
Beautiful. So in this spectrum, again, you can label it 1 through 8 if you want, but in this data maturity model, we've identified 8 kind of really distinct phases. That's the best way I can think of them. I'd love to take our audience through the 8 and really talk about kind of what happens at each one. So initially, I think the first step you talked about it, and I guilty, is a spreadsheet, right? I got to get a whole bunch of data together, and we have people that do research for us and abroad and whatnot, and they fill out a spreadsheet and they kind of bring the spreadsheet. It's usable to a point, but it just seems like a very primary, very, very kind of initial source of data.
It is. And spreadsheets also, if they're not put into sort of a collaborative or cloud-based environment, then they become static. And I could have a version of an Excel spreadsheet that I've done some data augmentation to and shared it with you. And then you go and save it to your hard drive and you've made other edits. And now we have versions of the same data, or we're overwriting. And it's hard to keep track of some of those static spreadsheets. And it becomes very manual. And from a data privacy and protection perspective, spreadsheets that are sitting on people's hard drives opens up the door to PII infringement and just mishandling of some of that information.
For our audience, PII.
Sorry, personally identifiable information.
Got it.
So it's your email, your contact information. Depending on what industry you're in, it could be much more sensitive type data that could be in a spreadsheet. So spreadsheets in regulated industries is something that really people should stay away from.
Got it. The other thing that for some of us, I travel extensively, and you have no visibility, no access to the hard drive that's on my laptop that's with me on the road.
Exactly.
And even though I back it up and I cloud, but it's not really in today's day and age is not really conducive to that. So if one is the spreadsheet, bottom left corner, then for our audience, we're going to go stair step to the top right. So next is we talk about this idea of, okay, I've got a spreadsheet, is my favorite. People who print that to a PDF, right? Completely static PDF. And now they send you, at least the spreadsheet, if you share it, I can click on the cell and I can look at the formulas and I can do, with the PDF, it couldn't be more, I guess, as operational reporting is what comes to mind, but it's just that. It's another static kind of version of the same info, and I can't do as much with it.
It is that downloading to a PDF or grabbing just certain cells and dropping them into a presentation deck or any of those things they are good, and they are good reports to see and visualize, but it is very static. It's not collaborative. It's not dynamic in any way. And it, again, is that point in time because that data isn't changing. When you take that screenshot or when you downloaded it or printed it, that's the most up-to-date information that it is. And you could have printed it a week ago. Your board meeting is in 2 weeks. Your data is now out of date for that meeting. So it works, but it's not a long-term solution.
Which leads us to 3, which is now I have a data warehouse of some sort. I have a query mechanism of some sort where I can actually query and do analysis from that data warehouse.
Yeah, and for those that are listening, a data warehouse doesn't actually have to be a giant data lake or an actual data warehouse. This querying and analysis level of sophistication can also be done within some of your tools like Salesforce or HubSpot, and creating those more dynamic dashboards because you can dig into it a little bit deeper. You can merge fields together, information together, things like that. But it is that ability to interact with the data, if you will.
For our audience, if you just joined us, we're talking about 8 levels of data maturity that we tend to see in organizations. 1 is I've got a spreadsheet, static. 2 is maybe reporting, PDF, or as Jenn mentioned, somebody grabs the cells from the spreadsheet and puts in a presentation. Useful, but again, it's just static. 3 is now there's a data warehouse and I can do any kind of query and analysis on it. 4, now it starts to get exciting. And it tends to be more of the middle of the road, which is I have a dashboard. I have potentially, I don't need a PhD in astrophysics. I can go into any number of tools that we use, or I can use any kind of a BI, business intelligence tool, and kind of create my own report and dashboarding.
Yeah, at this level, your data analytics team or your operations team has actually created that dashboard or sets of reports that then all interact together, where you can go in and you can review them on a as needed basis. You can drill into them as you'd like. You can add additional fields if you're trying to look at the data in a different way, but it does create sort of that unified view of your data. And it's not everybody pulling their own version. It's that North Star, if you will.
Yeah. So now it starts, and it seems really efficient. If I can kind of do my own dashboarding and reporting, and or get a report set up for me, and I can, we talk about the George Foreman grill, right? Click, set it and forget it. If I could just click on that easy button and get my report, very technical term for our audience. It's fantastic, and I got what I need, and we're moving on. Next one, and this is again for our audience. We've partnered with a company called Versalytics. And Bridget over there is masterful at this next one, which is kind of level 5 is really visualization, which is look at that data. So we have a customer lifecycle journey or our amplified time to impact. And it's a process, it's sequenced data along the way, and really starting to now visualize this data. And much more importantly, I'm not tethered to my desk. I can use it in mobile devices, tablets. I can move with it pretty seamlessly.
Yeah, so this is going to be in a cloud environment that can be interacted with wherever you happen to be. I'm sure most organizations set up an offline version. So the last time your device connected to the cloud, that's the most up-to-date information. For example, if you're a foreman on a sales floor or something like that, you would still have very up-to-date information, but maybe the connectivity is not 24/7. It's every 15 minutes. But it allows you to interact with it anytime, anywhere, dig deeper into that data versus just those previous pre-made reports.
Love it. So, and again, I've always believed that our brains process, and data shows this, visuals much faster than it does text. So, and we've recently met the really cool people at Story IQ, and Deidre is coming to our Relationship Economics Summit, and they do that. And we did a session where, I don't need all that data. Just show me the pertinent ones, and show me what is it you want me to take from from that story. So then leads us to 6, which is social and really collaboration around that data. We're not talking about Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. It's really multiple I think input sources at the collection, but also utilization of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And so it allows users from various levels of the organization to see the data that's relevant to them, but also either go up or down in the organization to see the data at a higher level. And it then helps create that cross collaboration across functions. So think of like your go to market function, your sales, marketing, customer success, having data and insights from maybe your product team, and all of that seamlessly being merged together in a way that both teams can get very valuable insights without having to either wait on a report or wait for somebody to kind of explain what they're looking at. It's a level of data awareness that really comes with that data-driven culture being part of their day-to-day workflow.
Love it. And now for our audience, we're getting into some PhD level stuff. I hope you're sitting down. So here we go. 7 is really data mining. And you alluded to this earlier. Beyond understanding what happened, and again, for our audience, we do something called sentiment analysis. So if you think of an NPS score, it tells you what's happening, but not really why. And what I love about data mining is it gives you more contextual insights into why something is happening. The other part that I've seen just kind of through your work is predictive. So the leading drivers you talked about, can we extrapolate that this customer's at risk or that employee is a potential flight risk? So talk about data mining for a second.
Yeah, so like you alluded to, data mining is the descriptive, so what happened in the past; predictive, what will happen into the future; prescriptive, how can we address this or what can we do about it? And then it also allows you to take some of those uncategorized, just open text fields and pulling out the key insights from that in a way that actually shows you the patterns. That's something that a lot of organizations struggle with when they don't use drop lists or checkboxes or things like that, because that creates very rigid buckets. When you have open text fields, you need the data mining engine to actually make sense of all of that open text quickly. So you're not reading line by line, and you actually can get the very high level bullet points.
Why is that unstructured data so difficult to work with, but it's still critical?
It's so difficult to work with because a lot of queries are written without taking in variability. And so you ask for it to pull up every mention of, let's just say, for example, Starbucks. We've spelled it with an S. If you don't write that query in a way that it looks for every variant of how that key term is written, capitalized, uncapitalized, S, no S, you'll only get one version of it. And so you have to have a data team that knows sort of what those parameters are and creates that variability search to find the right sentiment. And the words that are used, maybe somebody's talking about a customer support ticket, but they don't say customer support. They mention tech support instead, or just the tech and analyst, or the sales engineer did XYZ. In our world, we know that that's customer success because that's where the sales engineer goes, but the person who put it in the text field called it something different. And so it just creates a whole bunch of different variables that you then have to analyze.
And our audience may or may not know I'm originally from Iran, and Persians put an E in front of Starbucks, so it's S Starbucks. I think if it's spelled that way, I don't know what kind of data warehouse could figure that one out. But that's just if you meet a Persian, we typically pronounce Starbucks. We put an E in anytime we say S. S Starbucks is how we think of it.
Well, or those who speak the Queen's or now King's English, we put U's in things that don't have U's in America.
And that unstructured data causes all kinds of challenges. Utopia seems to be really stage 8, and we're now barely, I think, scratching the surface of really AI and generative AI and augmented reality and embedded analytics. And now it's getting to a very different and almost like a very intelligent kind of level of data maturity.
Yeah, the utopia is where it takes all of your lagging indicators and your leading drivers and the behaviors of people and the sentiment in their emails and communications, the content they're downloading, how they move through your website, and puts it all together. And it is leveraging that machine learning, and it's also leveraging some of those large language models and the AI driven insights that can be pulled from that, and really creates a learning, if you will, data reporting structure. And it allows you to derive meaning and value from all of those things quickly without having to go system by system or report by report. And it really embeds all of that information into your business apps. And so think of when you sign into Salesforce or your HubSpot, and right there at the very top are things that your prospects did overnight, or posts that were made on LinkedIn, or alerts that need to happen because support tickets came in, and all of those things. It actually gives you kind of a checklist that you can go through and quickly address all of that. And it almost seems like magic or superpowers.
So talking about magic and superpowers, I'm really curious. You and I were exploring generative AI for kind of our world, and this idea of machine learning that learns from data, that learns from history. Can you give us a glimpse into how does that happen? These large language models. So I feed them data, and as that data changes, it actually sees the change. And how does that learning happen?
Well, there's a super nerdy answer and there's a non-nerdy answer.
How about the
non-nerdy answer?
Non-Portuguese version.
So how does it learn? So I'll use an example that a lot of people may already be leveraging is your ChatGPT. So if you have ChatGPT on your computer and you've been asking it questions and prompts, the large language model actually will pick up on how do you structure your questions? What sort of information do you ask about on a regular basis? For example, are you doing a lot of research around marketing or sales motions, or maybe you're in the engineering space? And so it starts focusing and narrowing in on those topics and how you ask those questions. So then it knows how to respond, because with ChatGPT and most all AI and machine learning tools, you can give it feedback on the responses it gave you. And was this correct? Was this not correct? And as you start learning them, or as you start using them initially, giving it that feedback, giving the algorithm the feedback of, yes, this was right. No, this wasn't. Change this one thing. It allows it to modify its search criteria and modify the way that it gives you information back to be more helpful to you.
I am convinced the developers of at OpenAI that came up with ChatGPT learned that regenerate button from my kids, because my kids would ask for something. If they didn't get the answer they liked, or I don't know where they got it from, but if they didn't get the answer they wanted, they would ask the same question again. But joking aside, it's really cool that when you hit regenerate, it almost like it gives you the same meat of the question, but with a very different lens, very different kind of perspective, gives you different attributes or different sources that answer the same question, just in a very different way.
Yeah. And where that regenerate came from, my assumption of where it came from is a lot of developers, especially in the AI space, leverage what's called first principles. And to keep that at a very high level in a non-rabbit hole nerd fashion, it's when you're kids, or even when you were a kid and you kept asking why is it that way? Because you're trying to get to the root of what it is in its most basic form. And so first principles thinking is to take a very large problem and boil it down to the very foundation of what it is, and then think of other creative ways to solve that same problem. And maybe it is the same solution that already exists, but by boiling it down to the most base form, you can actually come up with really cool other solutions for a complex thing.
Should we expect ChatGPT to at some point say, because I said so?
I'm not sure it'll do that.
All right, moving on to, so for our audience, again, if you joined us late, or just a quick recap, we've been talking about a spectrum based on business value creation and really the level of sophistication, the level of complexity, of data maturity that we see in a lot of our client organizations. There's 8 of them. One is a spreadsheet. 2, think of a static, PDF from the spreadsheet. 3 is now I've got a data warehouse and I can do a query and analysis of it. 4, I got dashboards from either the packaged applications or BI, business intelligence tools that allow me to do my own. IT has developed a set of dashboards and reports for me. Really exciting, our partnership with Versalytics around data visualization, where I can see, set of numbers, set of sequence of information. I can visualize that data. They've done a fabulous job on visualizing movement of wine shipments and the temperature of the wine, from other parts of the world to U.S. is a fantastic demo. 5 was really, again, visualization mobility. 6, social and collaborative, where multiple people are utilizing to capture the data, but also presenting it or using it. 7, data mining, where you're now getting into not just descriptive of what's happening, but prescriptive as to kind of why and predictive as to what can we expect, and really looking at unstructured data. The other unstructured data, Jen, I think about is address written out, ADD, ADR, that just will not, unless somebody creates that metadata that says that's all the exact same information, never's going to go anywhere. And then really exciting field about this generative AI and learning engines, large language models that are going to learn. So think of those 8, bottom left corner where 0 is, top right corner, stair-step maturity does not happen in most teams or organizations overnight, but just really understanding where you are. And that's really, in essence, what our biz ops practice does. Focus on where you are today and really helps you think about how can we become more of a data-driven culture, specifically in our communication, our decision-making, our problem-solving.
Yes, absolutely. So from that, you mentioned, so we've talked about maturity and sort of those levels, but you mentioned a talk that Dave Kellogg did at SaaStr last week, and he talked about 15 signs that you have a metrics problem within your organization. And I'd love to just dive a little bit deeper on what those are and just share with our audience what was learned.
Yeah, let me preface that with I love, there's a couple of things I wrote in my notes that really resonated. So what I love about operators is that he's not regurgitating a book report, and I would highly encourage people. I think he's got a very robust blog. I would encourage you to check him out. And again, this has all been inspired by Dave Kellogg. He's an entrepreneur in residence at Balderton Capital and SaaStr, which was a big SaaS conference last year. This guy's got over 25 years of being a C-level executive. He sits on a bunch of boards. He looks at data. And as I said earlier, not just output, but really outcome and impact. And data as levers for decision-making, data as levers of what is it telling us and what should we do differently. And I wrote in my notes a couple of really clever humor, had enormous amount of credibility because he had done it. But he talks about numbers really don't lie. It's the stories, and to build on our session with Deidre Downing and Story IQ, the previous sessions of the stories we tell sometimes do. And they're not even lying intentionally, but they're kind of misleading, or they could be abused in many ways. So in terms of the 15 signs, there are strategic go-to-market motions that are problematic, that are really critical. So let me just run through. I'm going to name them, and then Jen, I'd love for you to, if you want, jump in and let's talk about some of these things. So one of the first ones that he talked about was bludgeoning, right? People use numbers to beat other people over the head of what's not happening. Newsflash: people who are responsible for things that are not happening, they know it. And that beating them over the head isn't exactly creating a collaborative culture. we kind of all know we're right now. It is. I'm not trying to pour salt or lime in any revenue leader's wound right now, but many organizations are not hitting their target numbers, and rightfully so. Uncertainty economy and interest rates, and still inflationary pressures, and our highly politicized environment, and so there's a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty creates a lot of people sitting on the fence. They're having unbelievable years, right, in terms of their revenue and their growth, and they're doing some really, but they're not spending money, and they're hoarding cash, and there's this wait and see attitude. Let's wait till our next month, or let's wait till next year, or let's wait. That whole wait and see attitude is very prevalent. So, using data for bludgeoning isn't particularly helpful. Well, you have also sat in meetings where they use it to kind of have this fencing contest of, oh yeah, watch this, right?
Yes. I mean, a lot of times we see this in organizations that have sales and marketing not necessarily on the same page. Marketing is saying that we're generating all these leads, and then sales is being bludgeoned because their pipeline looks really bad. And what I think people forget about in that conversation when they're bludgeoning you with numbers, they're not necessarily asking the question of why. Why are the numbers looking like this? They're just beating you over the head with the fact that the numbers aren't what they need them to be.
Yeah, so bludgeoning is number one. Number two is misleading. And again, I wrote in my notes, it's intended to, if you think about why and how we use, metrics, ideal if metrics are enlightening. They shed a light on not just what's happening, but why. When the metrics are used to obscure or to create vagueness, Jen's heard me talk to people. I'm allergic to vagueness, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. But if they're used to mislead, if they're used to create opaqueness and not transparency, then it's problematic. So you hear a lot of people rave about it. I mean, who's in the right mind is not going to put their best foot forward, right? And in particular, again, I took in my notes that Dave talks about, somebody who uses, we're 96% of plan. Well, that's great, but at that same set of numbers, you don't have to peel back the onion. If you just look at different rows of that report, you see that we're really 60% of new logo. We are, 93% of expansion, 73% of new ARR, and only 60% of net new. So it's misleading because it highlights kind of either the overall or just one facet that's going to make us look good, and not really get into shining light on other facets of the business.
Yes, and leveraging those metrics, like you just mentioned, you had 4 different ARR metrics, and that 96% is kind of an average or a boiling up of all of those. It's a roll up, and you didn't say that. And so while it is still mostly accurate, if you were more specific with what those metrics are, then people could have that broader picture and then have the conversation and the collaboration around, okay, well, we're down in expansion or we're up in expansion. How can we improve the other ones? What levers can be pulled to improve the other ones? With that specificity, those conversations become richer.
The other thing you and I've sat in on is marketing teams and attribution. Is that an MQL or is that an SQL? Is that a PQL or a DQL? It's like we're missing the point of, if we're not, call it whatever you want. I love Steve Hardy's, for our audience, in a previous episode, we interviewed Steve Hardy, the chief marketing officer at Profess. And I love his comment that non-marketing people do not care, because you start to get in the minutia, and we're not talking about, and it's a classic case of misleading. Let me tell you about our MQL and SQL. Okay, well, how many leads are we really contributing to the pipeline?
Absolutely right. And that actually brings us to one of the other metrics or problems with metrics that Dave mentioned, and that was rat holing, where they're talking about the metric itself and what defines an MQL versus an SQL or a sales touch or a marketing touch or whatever. And you're talking about the metric itself, not actually the business impact of said metric. and how to improve the business from the metric. So
love it. Love it. Yeah. So Rad Holdings is another one. Here's fourth in the list, which is deja vu, which is, you sit through meeting after meeting, monthly, quarterly, and you see the exact same numbers meeting after meeting. And particularly if there's been some time in between them, and you're like, wait, I feel like we've been down this road, and we kind of heard this a month ago and 3 months ago. And is there really nothing happening in the business to shift that? Jenn brought up, you pulled up a report, a static report for your board meeting, 2 weeks ago, and the board meeting is 2 weeks from now. That might as well be eternity in most businesses. And so the freshness factor, I often talk about data is like a lot like fish and maybe family visiting. After 3 days, they go bad, right? So are you the deja vu problem is we don't have our finger on the pulse of the business to get as near real time as possible. Comments on data you've seen from either the marketing team or sales team or customer success over on our churn. Our churn hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Using the same reports or using the same metrics over and over again, either to try and tell the story that things are just staying status quo, nothing's really going up or down, or just glossing over areas that may have issues, is something that I see when people start reusing reports. Either they're not choosing to invest the time to come up with a new report, or B, there are really big problems that they know about and they're trying to just kind of keep it under the radar, which then goes back to the misleading one. But that deja vu, I've been in several meetings with marketing, sales, customer success. Churn specifically is one metric that most organizations don't like talking about at all. Everybody loves talking about net new logos, closed deals, but anything that's related to any perceived negativity, churn, closed, lost reasons, things like that, nobody wants to necessarily highlight, but that's actually where you can get some of the greatest insights.
Number 5, semantics. This is the comment that I made earlier. I'm allergic to vagueness. So when somebody says best case, and my favorite, and Dave was chuckling. Dave talked about this as well. If the stars align, right? A lot of people like talking about. I'm like, well, I'm sorry. What does that happen? Like every 128 years? Like how does it? So when we don't talk about, and I got a way to fight this was I had an old manager who did ask for low, medium, high, but we had very specific definitions for it. So if you leave, and I will often say, you want better answers, ask better questions. If you leave it, the question or the reporting, if you leave room for ambiguity and vagueness, you're going to leave a lot of room for interpretation of, well, you know what, that is best case, but you know what, it's never going to happen. Semantics becomes particularly challenging where we're vague and we're, we use, terms that could be misconstrued, misunderstood.
Absolutely. And when you're defining those terms very similarly to your tech stack and your processes and everything else, it's not a set it and forget it. In time, as you grow and scale, as you add new products, as you add new teams, geos, et cetera, those terms may need to adjust a little bit or be clarified again to apply to the broader audience, or a new set of terms needs to be created for that new geo because they do it in a different sales motion. But really boiling down to what does this mean? And is there any other definition that this could be used for is really important, because we've also seen in several board meetings where people will use the same field, like in Salesforce, creating Salesforce reports, they'll use the same field for like 3 different metrics on several different dashboards. And it's not the right metric for anything, but that's what they've attributed it to. So then nobody really knows, okay, does that mean new ARR, expansion ARR, upsell, cross-sell, whatever? That one field is trying to capture all of it.
We're going to pick up the pace because I want to make sure we get through all 15. Okay. Next one, and for our audience, if you just joined us or you joined us late, we're talking about 15 signs of strategic go-to-market metrics that could uncover or really highlight some problems. It's problematic. So 1 was bludgeoning, 2 misleading, 3 Jenn brought up rat holing, 4 deja vu, we've kind of seen this, 5 semantics, potato, best case, I'm not sure what that means. 6 is recalculation. And this one is when we show up at a meeting and sales, marketing, customer success, finance, RevOps all bring their own reports. So because I don't quite trust the way you got there, so I'm gonna figure out, and I've got a personal story of my son and I had a bet of who could lose most weight, in a period of time, because we were getting in shape for an event, and the boy actually says, is that with clothes on or without? Is that with tennis shoes on or without? So recalculating your own data, Jenn, it highlights that you don't trust the data that's provided by other groups. Is that fair?
That is very fair. And your son was exercising a clarification of semantics. He was trying to make sure it was being done right. But yeah, recalculation, it's when you bring a report and other people start redoing your report, or they have their own version of the same report. It means that there is no unified view of the data, and there is no collective buy-in or trust in what we're reporting. So that's a very cultural mindset that needs to be adjusted.
We're running through the list. Number 7, inexplicability. So the company's not performing, but the numbers don't show why. We're not, I love the analogy I use here is people, and everybody knows it. That's the crazy part. They're raving about the view from the deck of the Titanic, right? We're in deep trouble, and yet, the numbers don't show it. The holes in the hull underneath the water level, where the water's coming in several decks below, is not known. It's not seen to everybody until we're in really deep trouble. And not understanding why that's happening is a critical reason for this going on.
And that too, just real quick, could be that you're measuring the wrong things or reporting on the wrong things. And so the holes that you mentioned in the bottom of the Titanic, they may not be showing up on the report or dashboard that everybody's looking at. So the report looks all pretty and shiny, but there's these massive gaping holes that just because that data is not being visualized, it's not being reported upon.
I love this next one, dissonance. I forget the exact song he used, but it's a popular song that if you look at the lyrics, it literally talks about murdering somebody and chopping them up, and it's just this happy-go-lucky tune, and it's like wait. So dissonance is about the words, and he talked about words not matching the music, but it's everything's fine, and the numbers look like they're bleeding, or yeah, we're really struggling, and no, it actually is pretty good. And so there's this cognitive dissonance between the verbal and the visual, because what you're saying is not matching what I'm seeing, and that's where the data is going to be problematic.
Absolutely.
Next one, innumeracy. So this one shows up where it is almost assumed that a certain profile of people, they're only the data people. It's typically the finance organization, CFO, finance function, or Jenn, RevOps are the only people that show up with numbers at the meeting. And I've always coached every leader, regardless of your function, you have to know your numbers. You have to know your ARR per employee. You have to know your progress since last time we met. We coach and help implement something called First Friday for a lot of clients, where I'm a big believer of balancing performing and learning. And let's look at the numbers from last month. Much more importantly, how do we learn from those? How do we apply them this next month? And First Friday is all about bring your numbers, bring the data, bring the insights that will really help us understand and really think through, not just the CFO and RevOps, but every member is contributing to the numbers.
Yes, and adding to this, sometimes you see organizations and leaders almost abdicate the responsibility of knowing those numbers because they have a BI person or they have the CFO, and that's the person that's the if they report the numbers, then those are the numbers that I'll trust. If anybody else talks numbers, I don't trust it. And that too is a cultural thing that needs to be adjusted. And the data literacy is also something in those types of organizations that needs to be elevated if that's how they're approaching their metrics.
Yeah, so that's a critical one, that if you abdicate that to finance or just to RevOps, it's a missed opportunity. The next one, deja vu. Let us know if you heard this one. I loved it when he brought it up. Out of 15, deja vu is repeated to reinforce, what we mentioned earlier, which is if you're going to meeting after meeting, month after month, quarter after quarter with the exact same numbers, you don't have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. The business environment is too complex, moves too fast, too much changes for key metrics not to change. For key metrics, you're not. This is not a static kind of an organization. Every organization is a living, breathing, moving within its ecosystem. So deja vu was a big one that he brought up. Disconnect. Disconnect is another one that, we mentioned earlier, MQLs and SQLs, and like, wait, are we adding to the pipeline or not? When the metrics are not connected to the strategy, when the metrics are not consistent with the strategy, you leave people scratching their heads of, okay, we've got all this data. Jenn has heard me talk about this. What, so what, now what? Daniel Pink, in his latest newsletter, I was fascinated, talked about, a professor that has been using that terminology since 2017. I think I've been using it since Jesus was around. What, so what, now what? What is the data telling us? Why would anybody care? How does this impact the business? How does this impact the direction, the strategy, the direction of where we're going? Now what? How do we course correct? How do we pivot? How do we understand what's working, what's not? And move away from things that are not conducive to our direction, our guiding light, kind of where we're going. Jenn, disconnect?
Yeah, we see a lot when, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, when you don't have the outcome determined and the metrics that are going to help show that the outcome was achieved or not. So it's not understanding what you're wanting to achieve and then matching the metrics to that. It's you've done something and now you're choosing metrics. So it's you've chosen the wrong metrics at the wrong time is where we see this. And then it also leads into our next one, which is piecemealing. You isolate like the campaigns or just the sales funnel or just pieces of it. And then you try and make this story with very isolated data points.
Yeah, and isolation and kind of misalignment also leads nicely to the next one, misbenchmarking. So one of the things that data is really cool at, is incredibly valuable for is benchmarking. How are we doing? I think it's innate to human nature. How might, ever since we were kids and we ran track or we swam, or how are we doing against the person next to us? How are we doing against? The key with misbenchmarking is, startups that compare themselves to much later stage startups, or mid-market companies that try to compare themselves to a large enterprise. You are not in the same. Real estate comps come to mind, right? Yeah, I wish I lived in a mansion, but if I don't, and trying to compare comps, and some people need to come back down to reality in terms of the value of their perceived value of not just their companies, but their homes and cars and other things. But are you comparing this? Is this comparable? Are you benchmarking it? Versus a like entity, like team, like organization, like branch office versus yours.
Yeah, and I think the example that he used for the misbenchmarking was like university applicants, those who took SATs, the size of high school you went to, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're just looking at those who applied, there's like a 90% acceptance rate. But then if you then boil it down even further, of those who applied that took an SAT and got a score of X, that's a much smaller subset. And that's who you probably should be benchmarking yourself against versus just the very broad bucket.
Next one is an important one, which is causality. You correlation and causation are two distinctly different facets that regrettably a lot of people don't understand. And they try to make a really compelling case of this is happening because of this. No. This is happening with this. And just a different lens of causation and correlation that is important to delineate. Last but not least is torture, which goes back to that first point of beating people over the head, right? So if you there's an old adage, and again, I love that he referenced that, talked about if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. And it's a quote that he used, and it's exactly right. You're twisting the data to kind of help convey your point, not really making a point based on the accuracy of the data.
Absolutely agree.
And I was going to say, but enough about our political party. That there's no need to go there.
Don't go there. Don't go there.
There's no need to go there. So again, if you missed the session, if you joined us late, we rattled off 15 signs of really strategic go-to-market metrics that really highlight a problematic scenario. And if you want the list of the 15, come to the Nour forum, nourgroup.com/forum. In the RevOps section, we'll list all these. We'll list the questions Jenn and I talked about. That's the closest way to describe that is that's our version of the show notes, where we talk about, we kind of put questions to the audience as well. It's a good chance for you to jump in. Jenn, any closing comments before I share kind of the next several episodes we got coming up?
Well, I would just say if you're not in it, if you're in an organization that's not using a data as the guiding light for what you do and how you do it, start shifting the conversation that way. Perhaps you come to meetings and nobody has reports. Start showing the reports and showing what you're doing, and it'll set the example for others. But also ask for feedback. So show what you're doing and then ask. We generated X number of leads, sales, what are you seeing? And so then you're bringing them into the conversation and allows them to contribute, and they also start buying into and trusting that data. So it's not something that you can do overnight, but the leaders that start showing and being the example can help guide that data-driven conversation.
That's a great summary. For our audience, again, we release a new episode every Tuesday at noon Eastern. Really hope you're getting value from these. Again, we know this. We see this in the assessments and the consulting work that we do. These are for you, and we hope you get value out of them. Again, just a reminder, next several episodes, we're going to talk about next week live change management and really how does it fuel intelligent growth. We're going to touch up on skills gap, what they need to, what teams need to learn, unlearn, and relearn to remain relevant. And then a good friend, Scott Ettinger, has published a new book called Growth Leader. So he's going to join us. He'll be our guest. And I think you're going to want to both pick up a copy of the book, but also listen to Scott's insights from his research. He's written several times for Harvard Business Review. He does a lot of sales consulting. And Scott Ettinger is going to be a great guest to have a conversation with. So we hope this session has been of interest and value to you. Again, we've been talking about data maturity and 15 signs of strategic go-to-market metric problems. On behalf of Jenn Cordz, I'm David Nour. This is Intelligent Growth. We're live each Tuesday at noon Eastern. We'll release an episode and hope you'll join us for the next one, or just search for Intelligent Growth wherever you consume podcasts. Until next time, we'll see you soon. Thanks.